Don't forget, if you're wanting to follow the reading for next year, that plan, if you will, is on the, I don't know, what would you call that? Leaning desk in the back, okay? Anyway, next to Ed. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about speech. I hope that we can give some insight as to what the Bible wants us to have for speech, but we're also going to look at some examples from the Bible for speech. We'll talk a little bit about cultural and media influence on speech. It hasn't enhanced it. I'll tell you that now. Okay, so surprised, aren't you? And speech and development of wisdom. Okay, that's what a lot of Proverbs is focused on. You see the word fool a lot in these verses, okay, because it's contrasted between a wise person and a foolish person. The wise person following good practice, foolish person not, okay? And so we'll see that throughout, most of the examples we have. There are a lot more examples in this. If you looked at the sheet that was sent around at the beginning of this class, there must be at least maybe 100 verses there that talk about speech. And there are some, and that's just in Proverbs. I mean, that doesn't count the New Testament, okay, which has its own very distinct, if you will, training we should get for speech. So I thought what I would do is, go all the way back to the beginning. And it's interesting to me that speech has always been here. I mean, there was a way for God to convey his thoughts to us, and he talked to us, okay? Now, there are other ways, but most of it had some means of handling language and telling us what he wants from us. These first 3 chapters, we see these things happen. He blesses and commands Adam and Eve, right? He confronts them after the fall, and then he shows mercy even though they did fall, right, to them. We see, things that God says to them. It's interesting to me that one of the first things that you see man saying to God is when woman was made. And we see in the 23rd verse of chapter 2, Adam saying to God, because, there's no one else there, right? So it's animals and God, that's all he has to talk to, talking about, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. And, even from the very beginning, what was said had power, had meaning, and had purpose to it. And we see this start from the very time man begins to communicate with God. And his acceptance of this and his recognition of the fact that, and there's some verses around it that would obviously round this out, but that woman was taken from the man, from his side. And it seems like almost all important things have something verbally said about it, okay? I don't know if you've wondered about speech. When you think about it, I have a little bit in here about Tower of Babel, but we have so many blessings, don't we? And almost every one of them that's physically a blessing for us, God says, I'm giving you this, but what? Manage it. I'm giving you this, but control it, right? Because desire, speech, thought, etc., are all blessings that were given to us. Our intellect is a blessing. But God tells us, manage this. Seek me, okay, to help do that, because you can't do it alone. Let's look at some other thoughts here. Genesis 3, verse 1. It's interesting that some of the earliest things that we see said by one of them is, one interaction is, of course, serpent and woman, right? Serpent saying to the woman. Did God actually say, Now, haven't we heard that a lot, especially now? I mean, 24/7 news cycle. You can't turn on anything that doesn't have some kind of political leaning to it these days, okay, and meant to sway you one way or another. But it didn't begin now, did it? I mean, Satan from the very beginning shows us how he uses speech to sway us, right? As he did a woman. And then Genesis 3:9. I think God still says this today. And this is why I put this in here. The Lord God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" Okay, and I think that that happens even still today, because I can picture God saying this to me. Where are you? Okay. Are you hiding from me? Are you trying to hide from me? You can't, but are you trying to hide from me like Adam did? Okay. Where are you? And I think it's still strongly something that we do, that we see God doing today. Okay, let's talk about the Tower of Babel just for a moment. Okay, so God observes human pride. So man has this ability to communicate, and it was homogeneous at that time, wasn't it? One language, right? One language. They could talk to each other, and they kind of get together and make some conspiracy and decide that they would build a tower to get to heaven. Right? Now, that's a fail on so many levels, but they never were going to make that anyway. But God declares his judgment on them, and all he did was create language, right? Different languages. And I think about that sometimes, to have one language on all creation at the time, and now all of a sudden you can't talk to your neighbor. And you can tell, you could see what would happen. It'll take time, but whoever could understand that person, they start to, get together, right, on their own area, right, to communicate with each other. In other words, it scatters, humanity across the earth. And so the Lord pointed out that they are one people and they all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Okay? But we've done enough with multiple languages, but he wanted us to be separate. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Of course, we know that God changed that, right? Speech. Yo.
I think it's interesting, and you might comment on this too, personal experience. So like in the corporate world, for instance, right, you have tasks to do, jobs or whatever. Like, seems to me the most important thing to have to get anything done efficiently or well is clear communication. Like it becomes critical to like actually getting the job done. And it's kind of fascinating to think about it in the context of Genesis 11, right? Like there's something about that, about being able to communicate effectively and clearly and allowing people to be on the same page that allows them to accomplish so much more. Whereas disinformation and lack of clear communication and lack of that kind of alignment or whatever is the very thing that prevents something like the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
I don't know, just kind of an interesting application or like modern understanding of that principle, like the power of words here, and what God recognized, and the challenges that we still face with that just on a daily basis.
Have you ever seen there's a cartoon that really epitomizes this. There's a cartoon, and the idea is, build some structure. Let's call it a ladder. Okay, build a ladder. And so the engineer thinks of it this way. Okay, the carpenter thinks of it this way. All right. Let's say the person that needs to use it thinks it's going to be this way, and it ends up being a swing. Okay, that's kind of what can happen, right? with unfettered, let's say, or unorganized thoughts. And I think that is a key to us. We have language, we study language, we study how things were said so we can understand, right? And then use, right? Understand and use.
Well, in the context, not just in the context of Proverbs, or the Bible, think about like language, and I don't know about anybody else, but for me, I usually think like, what are the words I can't say? Like I need to be like nice or encouraging. But the reality is that fits into like the character of who we are, because it is the primary way that we connect with other people. Mm-hmm. Like the way that we speak in our communication is the way that everything comes. So it's just kind of powerful thing that we look at maybe in a couple other areas. But I like the way you're going back here, because it sets the tone for everything. Like fundamentally, this was like at the heart of like human pride or whatever else, is their ability to communicate.
And we will get to some more pretty soon here. We'll get to some things in Proverbs that really point out the problem we have in our communications. Okay? You're talking to someone, okay? Sitting down, having a conversation. The person sighs in the middle of what you're saying. Okay? I think you pretty much get the idea, right? That they're either tired of hearing you or they don't agree with what you're saying. And we don't always know how we come across to other people unless they tell us. Sometimes in some environments, some work environments, they'll do what they call a 360-degree review, right, for you. That means everyone that you ever interacted with gets to have a shot at you, all right, with the idea that you better understand how you're coming across to them. Well, some of that we'll look at. Some of that Proverbs does for us, okay? I'll get through these here in a minute, and then we'll get to some of that. But, I think some of the most eventful things in the Bible come from the use of language. Right? And I try to think about, well, what if speech didn't exist, or they couldn't possibly understand what's being said. Some of the most important things that we know happened in the Old Testament, Proverbs times, wouldn't have happened. Okay, so Moses walks by a burning bush and God talks to him out of the bush. Okay, now on all levels, I think that is kind of astounding, but it's also astounding. What did Moses do? He answered him. Okay, so you're walking along. Here's a bush that's burning. It says, "Hey, take your shoes off. Come up here to me and talk to me." It's a bush. Okay, it's a bush. All right. Well, hey, you took my donkey. But yes, very true. Very true. The use of that in the Old Testament is quite interesting. Let's move on here. Okay. So God calls Moses by name. That's an interesting thing within itself. Okay, he calls him by name, and then he commissions him to deliver out Israel. And God tells some of the most amazing things to him. God says, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face. Yeah, I probably would have done that, for he was afraid to look at God. When God talked to man at first, man was kind of afraid of that. Okay, this is a little backward here. Okay, so God speaks audibly from the fire and the cloud. And Israel hears his voice directly. Obviously, it did frighten them, and they sent Moses up there to talk to him. We see the Ten Commandments given. In this chapter 19, verse 2, God calls to Moses out of the mountain. Okay, so he talks to him out of a bush. Now he calls him to him out of a mountain, and he will be epitomized, or be his image will be forever represented to them as with the cloud. Can you imagine having a cloud and a fire leading you? It's just kind of all of what happened, I think, kind of underscores how far Israel had to fall to not be pleasing. Okay, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Media has really driven a lot of what we see happening to language and speech in the world. In 1980, let's call it a baseline. Okay, it's been a meteoric rise, use of taking the Lord's name in vain, using vulgar language and coarse language. So much so that probably it's every single one of us have kind of become a little calloused. Okay. Now we fight against it, but we hear it, right, constantly. Overall offensive content in media has increased 173%. But this time, what's 9 times in percentage? What's 9 times something in percentage? Yeah. Say it loud. Okay. That's how more often you hear words that would never be spoken in even a mixed crowd, okay, at one time. Okay, so why? Some of the why. Okay, this is just a part of the why. I believe today, politicians are driving this quite a bit. I don't care either side. Okay. One side seems to be using it for this reason, though: authenticity, relatability. Some politicians think, oh, it makes me colloquial, or coarse language. I'm more genuine. I'm part of the, I'm what we used to say, truck drivers. You talk like a truck driver or a sailor, right? We're all sailors now. We're all truck drivers. All right, so we're talking about speech, and how did it get so normalized? Well, I was trying to think of a way to demonstrate this, okay? But if you're not used to something, let's say air blowing on your neck. Come on, it's nothing, right? A little air blowing on your neck. It's the first time it starts happening, you start doing this and trying to stop it and everything, but then a little while longer, doesn't bother you anymore. Something is rattling. Now, I hate rattles. Hate rattles in my car. All right. If something's supposed to be quiet, I want it quiet. If it's supposed to be, I hate it. Okay. And eventually, though, a rattle you forget. Oh, it's rattling. Until you get into it the next time, okay, and then you hear the rattle, okay. It reminds you. But we have been worn down. We are like a nub, okay. We started off as a strong, standard, if you will, for speech. We have been worn to a nub because of the amount that we are bombarded with in this world. Okay, let's look at how Proverbs talks about some of this. I think this is verses 1 to 7, and I'm going to read this, or I'm going to ask somebody to read. You can read it from the wall if you can see it. Can you see it? Okay, it's not bad. Proverbs 15, 1-7. Verse 1 reminds us that the tone of our response often matters as much as the truth that we speak. I think, Ray, you talk about that quite a bit in a number of your lessons.
The Bible not only tells us what to say, but how to say.
Yeah. And so I think that this first verse, a soft answer turns away wrath, it calms. You used to say music calms the savage beast. A soft and gentle reaction to something can decrease the volume and the wrath that's there. But a harsh word stirs it up. So it's like throwing a match to gasoline, right? Sometimes. Now, I'm not saying that anyone's perfect or we can be perfect. But I think we could see this, right? I mean, it always kind of grates on me when you're watching let's say a detective program or a police procedural program. Let's call it that. And it's a hostage situation. And somebody gets on the phone and says, "What would you like to eat? Do you need any blankets? Is it too cold in there? Is it too hot in there? What can we bring you?" Etc. Until I see what they're trying to do. Is they're trying to lower the volume, right? The angst there. Have you ever seen, does anyone here do you have an example of where you've seen something go from bad to worse based on what's been said?
Being around teenagers, see what happens when either teenagers are bickering or fighting amongst one another, or even teachers will sometimes try and use their voice if their students are being loud.
Like try to yell over them?
They'll try and yell over and overpower. They even had like students tell me, we don't get anything done in this particular teacher class or whatever, we're doing this, things like this. And I've even had students ask why I don't do the same thing. And I've told them that I haven't thought of this exact passage necessarily connecting to it, but it doesn't work. I have students get loud or lose focus. I stop saying anything. I usually just move my mouth to the location of where the distraction is coming from, and I just engage. I'll look at what's on their desk, which is often something that is missing, something that should be there that isn't there, or whatever. I just stop, don't say anything, and that has a lot more powerful effect than trying to talk over. So that's what I found, and of course, I've had some teachers ask, and I'll mention that or whatever. But there's a lot of you just try to overpower. Well, I'll be louder than there. It doesn't work. It just becomes more chaotic and feels.
So there's some words that I wish we could just remove from some context. Okay, what did you say to me? Have you ever, when you hear that, what did you say to me? What did you call me? When you hear those words, this is going the wrong direction. Okay, it's not going to end well. So let's go on to the next here, this idea of the tongue, okay? There's a lot of teaching in the New Testament about the tongue. It's a fiery thing, okay? We know that. The tongue of the wise commends knowledge, but the mouths of fools pour out folly. Wisdom is, I think this verse is telling us, wisdom is revealed not only in what we know, but how we talk, how we communicate it. It's not just what we know, but it's how we say what we know. The tongue of the wise adorns knowledge. A wise person speaks thoughtfully, using shaping words, okay? Always speaking the truth, but finding the right way to say it and to put it. I kind of thought of this as an example. Have you ever seen an uncut diamond? Okay, so they find an uncut diamond. Looks like a ugly glass rock, okay? But when that skillful guy gets done, craftsman gets done shaping it and draws out the brightness of it, it's beautiful, right? It takes our breath away when we see that. But before then, it's like, yeah, it's a rock, you throw it back. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, and I think this is a key, keeping watch on the evil and on the good. I think this verse reminds us that God is aware of every and is ever present, right? In whatever is going on. This truth offers both, though, accountability, okay, and comfort, right? Because there is an accountability to this. God's watching, we are accountable to him, right? By what we say. And so this is, I think, something that we can carry with us, okay? Keep it in mind. The next idea here, this in verse 4, a gentle tongue is a tree of life. I love that phrase. A gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. Verses 1 to 4 show us the kind of the power of our words. Okay, verse 4 kind of highlights, let's say, the life-giving. Now, is this in some ways it may be truly physical life, but can you see this as being spiritually life-giving? Okay, because you can kill it, you can kill that spirit. Okay, by how you react and how you deal with others, right? Instead, if we use gentle, maybe thoughtful approaches, that can encourage, that can heal, that can spawn hope, right? But as soon as you hit a harsh word, okay, you then erase the progress that you had made. A fool despises his father's instruction, but whoever heeds reproof is prudent. I think that's kind of what all these verses are, verses 1 to 7. This verse here, it kind of continues to focus on wisdom, right? But now he shifts, I think. It kind of shifts a little from the impact of our words on others to our responsiveness to guidance. So just as gentle and thoughtful speech can bring life, receiving correction humbly is also a sign of wisdom. And that's not something necessarily that we're born with, right? To have that ability to take instruction. A fool will reject that instruction, will harden their heart, will turn away, will stop listening, right? I think where it's placed here, it emphasizes that wise communication is a two-way street. The one that's receiving the instruction, the one that's receiving the communication has a responsibility to that discussion and to that conversation also. Often, we're looking for what we're going to get and what we can take and what's going to be given to us when we have a part in that final result, right? Any comments on anything yet on that? Let's look at in the house of the righteous there's much treasure, but trouble befalls the income of the wicked. Within this flow, if you will, of these first 7 verses, this verse shifts the focus from speech and response to instead the fruit of a righteous life. Okay, what comes from that, right? Careful words, a receptive heart, okay, that promotes harmony and wisdom. But a life lived in righteousness brings lasting result, lasting value. Right? The treasure of the righteous is not material necessarily. It's instead peace, integrity, a legacy left that others will follow. That's great income, right? The lips of the wise spread knowledge, not so the hearts of fools. So this verse kind of brings the section, as much as you can get a bookends in Proverbs, okay, I'm going to call this a bookend, okay. This verse brings the section full circle, I think, returning to this theme of speech, okay. Lips of the wise, talking about the speech of the wise, right? And then while highlighting the connection between our heart, our minds, and what comes out of our mouth, right? You've probably never heard anyone say, I didn't know what I was saying. So many times we say something and we reach to grab it back, but I think we're learning here that we have to keep ourselves under control so that we do know what we said, so that we don't say that, right? Okay, knowledge, understanding, and a gentle application, right, of both of those things. Okay, Proverbs 25. Excuse me, verses 8 to 14. In general, I think these verses are talking about avoiding hasty accusations. Have you ever been wrong? Have you ever accused somebody of something? Find out later you were wrong? It's a very human thing. We do it, right? I do it. We sometimes jump to conclusions. And it's interesting. These are, I think, real life aids for you and I to follow. What your eyes have seen, do not hastily bring into court. What would be the problem with that? How many times has in the court, let's take it to a court of law, okay? That's not really necessarily what it's talking about here, but in a court of law, how many times has somebody started down a line saying, so-and-so, I saw so-and-so doing blah, 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 only to have the opposing party come up and say, well, that's where they live, okay? That's why they were there. Or their child was coming from school, or whatever the case is, okay? And debunk what's said. That's kind of what is said here, is not to jump to conclusions, not to act so hastily. Because when the neighbor, for whatever you did, when the neighbor proves that what you're saying isn't true, it shames really not just you at that point, but a lot of what you say from now on and what you have said in the past. Okay? It's called a reputation, right? This idea here of argue your case with your neighbor himself, boy, do we ever do that? Many, many times we're taught, right, that if we have a problem with someone, we are to go to them directly. But usually what do? We go to them directly someday. We get to them, right? We're going like this way or around this way. By the time we're done, we talked to 20 or 30 other people. And then finally we get to the person that you were supposed to go and talk to. Argue your case with your neighbor yourself, and do not reveal another secret, lest he who hears you bring shame upon you, and your ill repute have no end. This happens so much. Now, we call some of it gossip. But this really, I think, is a slightly separate case from that, because you're doing it for a reason. Okay? Sometimes gossip is done because they can't help themselves. Okay? And this idea here, pardon? Oh, without every day, it's done online. I'm actually I was slow to the whole social media stuff, okay? Slow to jump on it. Since we moved here in 19. So what is that? 7 years? Okay. And I'm shocked at what I see online now. I never would have seen that then. Okay. And it's the speech, the coarse treatment of others, the hatefulness, etc. And so most definitely. And there's actually a law against spreading lies to an extent, right? At some point, you can get to the point of where you are defacing someone else. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And once that happens and others find out it happens, and that kind of ruins your reputation to try to help anyone going forward, right? It's sort of like go to the grocery store and you overreact to something, affront from maybe you got charged the wrong thing or whatever, and you eat the cashier out for it. Try to go and teach that cashier. Try to go and teach anyone that works in that store after that. Okay, it could very much hurt that. Okay, we'll go on. A word fitly spoken is like, and don't you love this sentence? A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. They used to do that a lot in the old days. I haven't seen an apple of gold here lately, but I think it's the idea here. There's the wisdom in speech is it can be everything, right? You can have all the right that you can have based on what the Bible says. You can have all the right you want. Say it, though, in a hateful manner, and you just erased the rightness, right? And that, at least in that person's eyes, right?
Silver tray up front here with golden apples on it. I think we all want to get closer, take a look. It's attractive, it's desirable, it's something that draws attention in a positive way. That's what a good word is.
Yeah. It's a good word, memorable, and it has value.
I like what you would say. If I went to the store and saw something like that, my reaction would be, "That's too rich for my blood." I can't. That's way too fancy for me. Which I think also kind of doubles down on the point even more. Even those things that you think are extraordinary, out of reach, and prestigious, it's really accomplished through just a word that he's spoken. This thing is so glamorous and out of reach is actually just the same as saying the right word at the right time.
How about a gold ring or an ornament of gold? Those two, I think we get 13. I wanted to get the 13. We got a few minutes left. Okay, like the cold of snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him. He refreshes the soul of his masters. Can anyone tell me what that means? I have an idea, but what's the cold of snow doing for them? It's refreshing. Now, okay, I have shoveled. and preserving. I've shoveled a lot of snow in my life, okay, and maybe the first minute or so, it was refreshing for me. So I had to work on this one a little bit, all right? But, verses 8 to 10 warn about being hasty. I think in this case, 13 then kind of extends this by illustrating the value of faithfulness and reliability in communication. So like the cold of snow, what it communicates, so should a faithful messenger be, okay? A messenger who delivers words or messages with integrity, it's refreshing, right? It's a refreshing thing. It's a very good, yeah, it's a very good analogy. Yeah. Nice tall glass of tea, too. Yeah. Okay, like clouds, another weather thing, like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts a gift he does not give. Now this is the opposite, okay? So where the other was refreshing to have the snow to fall into, after being hot and sweaty. This is like, here are clouds and wind. We had that a lot here, okay? We get a lot of wind and we get clouds here. Now sometimes we get a lot of rain, but most of the time we get clouds that get blown through and no rain, especially in the winter, which is the opposite for me. When I moved here, they had to educate me because I didn't realize that summer was the wet season and winter was the dry season, which is 100% opposite of Northland, okay? And so I think in this case, we get this a lot here. I think we get this message, right? We're done, right? Is that second? Okay. We're going to pull up here for speech, okay? And there was a lot more, but that list is there. You can maybe follow some of that. Thank you.